Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by yours truly, the Package Tourist and the Magical Mystery Tour called Life, Matthew DiBiase. Tonight's guest is author Jeffrey J. Miller. Jeffrey is an esteemed author and football scholar who has written numerous football histories during the past 30 years, several of which I have read and enjoyed immensely. Last month, Jeffrey, along with co-author John D. Steffenhagen, released the book Lyons, the Rochester Jeffersons, and the Birth of the NFL. Tonight, we will be discussing Jeffrey and John's latest opus. Jeffrey, welcome back to the show. It's a great honor to have you here. I'd like to start off by asking you, what led you to engage in a collaboration with John D. Steffenhagen for this book?
John and I have been friends for quite a while. I had done a book on the Buffalo All-Americans who played during the 1920s, the same decade as the Rochester Jeffersons, and I had gotten to know John during that time because somebody had put me into touch with him because he had some photographs from that era that would work well in my book. I contacted him, and we corresponded regularly. We became pretty good friends. And over the years, he had asked me to help him write this book on the Jeffersons several times, but my feeling was I had moved on to writing about the more modern Buffalo Bills. So I kind of resisted going back into time and doing that. But, then I did the Pop Warner bio in about 2015, and it kind of rekindled his interest in doing this. And he reached out to me about 5 years ago and gave me some of the newer literature that he had found, some of the newer documents, and I just became fascinated with the story, and I wanted to be the one to tell it. Leo's is a fascinating story.
Where did John get those documents from? I mean, what archives was he consulting to get those materials?
Those are Leo's personal documents. Leo was keeping a journal. It's incredible to think that a guy in 1906 who was, all of 18 years old, not even 18 years old yet, he joins the team in 1908. He was 16, and he's already keeping a journal of his exploits. He's writing again down the teams he played, the players on the team. He's writing down everything. Where he went to, who he spoke with. So John has these journals that Leo kept from approximately 1908 up to 1925.
Wow.
In addition to that, there were backs of newspapers, the Saturday Evening Post. There would be scribbles on there about the league's formation and meetings with George Halas or whatever. And John just acquired all this stuff. It was handed down to him by through his family, and he didn't know what he had until he was an adult. He didn't really follow football until later on when he found out who Leo was. Then he became really interested in football. And then he realized, I'm sitting on this treasure trove of documents. It's really incredible.
Talk about a mother lode of primary evidence. I mean, that's fantastic. Yeah, literally, it's 24 karat gold. Jeffrey, please tell our listeners about Lyons' background. Where was he born and raised? How did he make his money? And what did he do?
Leo was born in Fairport, which is near Rochester. He grew up in a Catholic family. He and his father never really got along. He started wanting to play football at an early age, and his father was against it because he thought it was too violent and meaningless. He thought Leo should just get a job and start thinking about his future, even at the age of 15, 16. But Leo had other ideas. He just fell in love with the game of football, and he became obsessed with it. And eventually, after joining the Jeffersons in 1908, he takes over the team in about 1910. He takes over the team and becomes the manager, and from then on, it's his team. While he's doing this, Leo had the disadvantage of not being independently wealthy. He wasn't like some of the owners of the early teams, or he didn't have like the Staley Starch Company behind him or anything like that. So he was working 2, sometimes 3 jobs while he was playing football. He was working as a telephone line man. He was working for the Rochester Electric Company, and he was just doing whatever he could to make money. And most of his money was spent to support his team.
When were the Rochester Jeffersons formed, and why were they called the Jeffersons?
They were were actually formed around 1898, and they were formed by a local. What happened was there were a bunch of players who were playing at the University of Rochester, and they got the school ended the program, so these guys wanted to play. So they got the Jefferson Club, which was a politically affiliated club in the city of Rochester, to sponsor them. So they became kind of a sandlot team, and they played other sandlot teams. They were named the Jefferson Club was named after the Jefferson Avenue in Rochester.
Okay.
So the team itself is basically named after a street in the city of Rochester.
Where exactly did the Jeffersons play football? Where was their field?
They played on local sandlots early on. They played on fields called like Sheehan's Field and West End Park, and so they were truly a sandlot team. This is like the early, the 19aughts and the 1910s, but around 1915 they become a little more sophisticated. They moved to the baseball park, where the Rochester Colts of the International League played. So they were becoming a little more sophisticated. They were drawing bigger crowds as they got more popular. They got more successful. Once they moved into the NFL, they were playing at the baseball park, or they played at Edgerton Field.
Okay. Now, did Leo Lyons ever become the head coach of the Jeffersons, or no?
Well, technically, he was listed as the coach for a few games in, I think, 1923, but he was never really the coach. Usually they had one of the players on the team as the coach. Most of the time they actually did have a coach, like Joe Alexander was a coach, Jerry Noonan was a coach, Cecil Grigg was a coach, but they, sometimes they were in between players or whatever, so Leo would be listed as a coach, but he wasn't really a coach. Football strategy wasn't his thing.
Okay. Who were the key players for the Jeffersons?
In the early years, when they were playing sandlot semi-pro football before the NFL came along, they had players like Pop Morrison, Dutch Melody, Art Webb, Joe Bachmeyer. These were the local stars, and these are the players that the fans in Rochester wanted to see. These guys were like local celebrities around town. The local sandlot circuit in Rochester was very popular. So these guys were, they weren't making a lot of money, but they had this kind of celebrity as they walked around town. Later on, when they joined the NFL, Leo was able to recruit a few very good players. Joe Alexander is the most prominent one. He's actually in the College Football Hall of Fame. He played for the Rochester Jeffersons for a couple of years, was their coach for a while. He was an All-American center from Syracuse, and he also was an All-Pro in the NFL for a couple of years. He had Elmer Oliphant, he had Ben Boynton, he had Jim Laird. So he had a few prominent players. There were some really good players. He just couldn't keep them because the city of Rochester wasn't turning out and supporting the team the way it needed to.
Any idea as to salaries? What were the players paid, in terms of salary scale?
Well, the local guys, the sandlotters who kind of filled out the roster, they were likely paid $25 a game. The guys like Alexander and John Barsha and Benny Boynton, they were making $100 and $150 a game.
Yeah, okay. Now, I was looking at your book. Is it true that the Jeffersons were the first pro team to actually use a logo on their jerseys? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. Around 1912, Leo had decided he wanted to make the Jeffersons a truly professional team, because there were a lot of other teams in Rochester, and he wanted the Jeffersons to be like the premier team in the city. So he was the first one to have uniforms that were all the same color. So he was friends with a gentleman named Walter Hagen. Walter Hagen is one of the greatest golfers of all time.
Yes.
And the two of them grew up together, but Walter Hagen didn't really like football, but they played baseball against each other and with each other, so they were very close friends. And when he was trying to design his uniforms, he went to Walter and he said, "What do you think?" Because Walter was well known as a very flamboyant dresser. He was kind of a dandy. And Walter said to him, you should go with bright red, the color of blood from that sport that you love so much. So Leo decided to go with red. And he also wanted to be distinctive and set him apart from red, rather than just putting a J or a C or some other, like a lot of teams had the initial of the city or the team on the jersey. He wanted something more distinctive. So he came up with this script logo that said Jeffs in script lettering, which was very unique. It was actually, it is now recognized as the first logo used by a professional football team.
Wow. Just like to add to our audience there, Walter Hagen was the great professional golfers in the 1910s and especially the 1920s. He and Bobby Jones literally dominated golf in the 1920s. Yeah, a true living legend in golf. Yeah.
Right.
Getting back, then from 1922 to 1925, the Jeffersons went 0-21-2. Jeffrey, what caused their decline and fall? What happened?
Mainly a lack of money, so that Leo couldn't attract the good players. By 1923, Joe Alexander, Elmer Oliphant, Jim Laird, these guys, they're not playing for the Jeffersons anymore. They've moved on. Like Joe Alexander goes to the New York Giants. Okay, Ben Boynton goes to the Akron Pros and then to the Buffalo All-Americans. These guys, they moved on. Leo couldn't guarantee them the money that they could make somewhere else. So you can't attract the good players. So he was going around playing other teams with mainly sandlotters, and they didn't stand a chance against some of these bigger teams. They played the Chicago Cardinals with Patty Driscoll, and they get beat 60-0 because Leo just didn't have the horses to stand up against the big guns.
So, Jeffrey, is it accurate to say, like, during the early years of the NFL, the very small market teams were just losing out to the big cities? I mean, it was like a winnowing out process. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. In the early years, you had the Muncies, you had the Daytons, and you had the Rochesters and the Pottsvilles. When you move later into around 1925 or so, that's when you start seeing New York come in. Frankfurt, Philadelphia has a team. Frankfurt, is a Philadelphia team. The Bears who started out as the Decatur Staleys in Decatur have moved to Chicago.
Yeah.
So you're seeing this move to the bigger metropolises, and the teams that like Muncie, they weren't going to cut it. Green Bay was really the only team that came from a small city that survived. They somehow, I don't know how they did it, but they managed to survive. Obviously they had the community-owned team, but most teams, you had to be in a big city where you could attract big crowds.
Jeffrey, please tell our audience how Leo Lyons made an attempt at signing Red Grange when Grange was ready to leave Illinois and be turned professional. Please tell our audience that story. What happened?
It's a fascinating story.
Go ahead, tell it.
Around 1923, Leo is already thinking about signing Red Grange. He thinks, if I can get someone of his stature, I can save my team. He's reading the papers every Monday or every Sunday, Monday, whenever the reports come out about Grange's exploits. And one Saturday, Grange gets hurt in a college game, and he writes in his journal, Grange hurt. Hope it's not serious. Like he's already got this idea. He's going to sign Grange, and he's got correspondence with George Halas because George Halas is thinking the same thing. Well, come 1924 or 1925 rather, when Grange gets ready to graduate, Leo's already setting his plan in motion. In January, he hops the train to go to the league meeting, and while he's out there, he takes a side trip out to Wheaton, Illinois, and he meets with Doc Cooley, who was at the time he was one of Leo's managers. C.C. Powell comes along later, but Doc Cooley is kind of acting as his manager at this time, and Cooley tells him, Grange is going to sign with you. Okay, we're going to get him to sign with you. Leo was offering $5,000 a game. Now, $5,000 a game in Chicago or New York is a lot of money. In Rochester, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So he goes, and he also, while he's out there, he also goes to Grange's home and meets with Grange's father. And Grange's father tells him, "I'm going to get Grange to sign with you. I like you. I'm going to get him to sign with you." So Leo gets the money. He raises the money by going to a mafioso. A mobster from the city of Rochester writes him a check for $5,000. John has the check in his archives. And, Leo goes to Chicago the day Red is supposed to sign at the Morrison Hotel in Chicago. And he can't get in because Red is already in there sequestered with George Halas and Dutch Sterneman signing his contract. And he gets a lot less money from Chicago, but I think it's because he believes, that there's more stability there. So Leo was ready to pay him $5,000 a game. Now, this would have killed him because the city of Rochester, there's no way they could have supported this. But Leo felt like, I'm going to throw up a Hail Mary, and I'm going to sign the most famous player, and the fans are going to come out and watch him. And probably a good thing that they didn't, because he'd probably be broke and divorced.
Tell me the name of the mobster. I mean, was this future Cosa Nostra? I mean, what was the name of the mobster? Do you know the mobster's name?
Boscarino. Alfonso Boscarino was the gentleman's name, and it's funny because his name is right there on the check.
Wow, jeez.
He just wrote out this check, and Leo was gonna give it to Grange. Leo had a lot of connections, in both the legitimate world, business world, and the underworld. There was a time, and this is in the late 1900s and early 1920s, where or late 1910s and early 1920s, where he was actually running moonshine to make money, because he was desperate for money, so he was running shine.
Yeah, I mean, it's a port city right across from the Great Lakes. There, it would be kind of logical when you think about it,
Exactly. There was stuff was coming in from Canada or going out, and he was basically a middleman, and that's how he made money.
Jeffrey, is it true that he was present at the creation of what later became the NFL? Please tell our listeners the story of that famous meeting in 1920.
Sure. Let me give you a little background first. Leo had been wanting to start a professional league as early as 1912. He was thinking about, baseball has a professional major league. Football should too. And he didn't understand why they didn't. So after they win the state championship in 1916, he's starting to think, well, we got to take this on the road. He knows about the Ohio League, and everybody knows about Jim Thorpe. So he challenges the Canton Bulldogs in 1917 to a game. And the Jeffersons go out there and they get their butts kicked 41-0. But while he's there playing, he goes up to Thorpe and he says, Jim, I'm in Rochester, but I think it's time for football to have a national professional league. And Jim says to him, you know what? We've been talking about that out here. The guys are going to get together. We're going to do this. We'll make sure that you're called, and we'll have you come here. Well, fast forward 3 years, he finds out that they're organizing, and Leo makes plans to go to the organizational meeting in Canton. In John's notes, he's got the journal notes. He's got all this stuff written on the back of a Saturday Evening Post. When Leo leaves the train station, when he arrives in Canton, what hotel he's staying in, who he's meeting with, who he's standing next to at the meeting, what time it starts, who had cigars, who brought the bootleg whiskey. It's all there, or the bootleg beer. It's all there. And what's fascinating to me about this story is that we've always heard it told from only one perspective, and that's George Halas. We have Leo telling, this whole story, not just about, the meeting, we drank beer in buckets and we sat on the running boards. I mean, he's telling you who stood next to whom, and, how Jim Thorpe arrived late. Because in George Halas's book, George Halas says Jim Thorpe wasn't even there. Leo documents that he was there, and Hallis had already left. Thorpe shows up, and there's like 4 or 5 guys standing around talking in this showroom for the next several hours, drinking beer and smoking cigars. And it's just a fascinating story that no one's ever heard before. And to me, that's the charm of this whole book, is that we're hearing a different perspective. Maybe not a lot of earth-shattering stories, although there are a few, but you're hearing it from a different perspective rather than just from Joe Carr, George Hallis, the usual suspects.
Fantastic. Okay, in your book, please tell our audience, how was Lyons involved in the present-day shape and size of the football itself?
At one point in the late 1910s, he was corresponding and got to know Jim Thorpe, because they played in Canton, and so they continued to correspond. There are letters, and there's notes in his journal where he says, talking to Thorpe on the phone, etc. So there's a passage where he is talking to George Hallis, and he says, "I was talking to Thorpe about the size and shape of the football. It's too big and too unwieldy to throw. We need to make it so that it's easier to carry and easier to throw." And Lyons proposes to Hallis that they get together with Arnold Horween, who plays for the Dayton Triangles, and also works for the Wilson Sporting Goods Company, and go there and talk about what they can do to redesign the football. So Leo, Arnold Horween, and I think Dutch Sterneman is also in this meeting, in Hallis. They meet at Wilson Sporting Goods, and they're discussing reshaping the ball. Later on, about a year later, I think, there's actually before the Jeffersons play the Bears in Chicago in 1922. These footballs, a prototype from Spalding and a prototype from Wilson, are delivered, and there's actually a skills competition that goes on with some of the star players from both teams: Joe Alexander, Leo Lyons, Dutch Sterneman, Joey Sterneman, Pete Stinchcomb, and Hallis, and they're all punting, kicking, passing this football. And it's amazing that, you think about it now, they have these skills competitions at the Pro Bowls, and basically they were doing this back in 1922. Well, anyway, they didn't change the shape of the football right then, but it changed in a couple more years, and it all started with this meeting that Lyons and Hallis, Horween, and Sterneman have.
Yeah.
It's again, it's just one of those things nobody knows about. Like, if the football didn't just change its shape, by itself, somebody had to initiate that. And that was these 4 gentlemen.
Yeah, I'd like to explain to our audience and our listeners that in the very early years of football, at college and pro football, the football was far more plump, more rounder. It was far more conducive for kicking than it was for throwing in that sense. There was a lot more emphasis on field goal kicking and drop kicking and punting in those days.
Because it was basically an offshoot of the rugby football.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So after the Jeffersons fold after 1925, what did Leo Lyons do after football? What did he do with his life, and when did he pass away?
He became involved in owning a paint store, and that was actually initiated by George Hallis, because Hallis really liked Leo Lyons a lot, and I think he knew that the Rochester Jeffersons weren't going to last. So he encouraged Leo to start taking these courses with the Hockaday Paint Company. Seriously. So he would go to out to the league meetings, and then he'd take a side trip down to Hockaday Paint Company in Chicago, and he'd learn about how paint is formulated and how to sell paint and all this stuff. So eventually he opens his own paint store, and it becomes very successful in Rochester. As a matter of fact, so from the 1930s to the 1970s, he's running this paint store. But while he's doing this, he's collecting memorabilia and artifacts and documents from the National Football League. So he's got a collection that goes back from 1908 all the way up through. So there are letters from Leo that he wrote to the Green Bay Packers or the Chicago Bears saying, if you've got any documents, any programs, any jerseys, any footballs, anything you're not using anymore, send it to me. I'm collecting this stuff. Around 1936, the Baseball Hall of Fame they're talking about establishing the Baseball Hall of Fame. Leo says, he writes a letter to Joe Carr. He says, hey, we need to have a Pro Football Hall of Fame. So this is Leo's idea.
Ooh.
He says, we need to have a Pro Football Hall of Fame. The response from Joe Carr is, it's a great idea. We love it, but we don't have the money right now. We're still very young in our, in what we're doing, so we might be a little premature here. But there's letters then to Elmer Layden, Bert Bell, and Pete Rozelle along the way, where he's writing to them and saying, we got to do this. So around 1960, when they decide that they're going to build the Pro Football Hall of Fame, they make Leo the honorary historian of the NFL. So he's involved in this all the way through, and he even gets Art Rooney to bring 2 exhibition football games to Rochester. The Steelers played in Rochester a couple of times. So Leo maintains this close relationship with his friends from the NFL. He lived into the 70s. He died in 1976, and I think he was 84. And yeah, that was it.
Was Leo Lyons inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
No. Yeah, and I don't like to be with that guy that says, "Oh, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame." But when I look at everything he did, from the first logo to hiring the 4th known black player, being a pioneer of integration, being president at the formation of the league, having the idea for football trading cards, the Hall of Fame, being the first historian, being an original owner. I think that his resume, a lot of people are talking about Ralph Hay being inducted, but I think Leo's got it all over Ralph Hay. Supposedly he was nominated a couple times, but I can't find the record for that. But Bob Carroll, the noted football historian, mentioned in an article that Leo had been nominated by Art Rooney and George Halas on a couple of occasions for Hall of Fame induction, but never passed.
Can we let's talk about, you talk about integration of the game, being racially progressive. Can you expand on that, Jeffrey? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, in 1911, the Jeffersons were playing a team called the Rochester Oxfords, so this is the Sandlot years. And the Oxfords had a gentleman on their team named Henry McDonald, and he was from Haiti, but he went to high school in Rochester, and he was pretty well known. There weren't a lot of African American or Haitian Americans, Black Americans, playing, in high school sports at that time. So he was pretty well known because he was also an exceptional athlete. He played baseball, he ran track, and he was great at football. But one thing he noticed when they played the Oxfords a couple of times that year, the first time they played them, McDonald ripped off a couple of long runs, like 75 yards. And what would happen after he ran these big touchdowns, the white players would pat each other on the back and whoop it up and run off the field. Nobody would congratulate Henry. Nobody would go over and give him a high five or pat him on the back. If he ran and got tackled, nobody would help him up. So the second time they played, he noticed this again. He's like, this guy's great. He's their whole team, and they're treating him like he's nothing. So after the game, Leo went over to Henry because the Oxfords beat the Jeffersons, and they were going off to celebrate. And he went over to Henry. He goes, "Why aren't you going off to party with your friends?" And he goes, and Henry looked at him. He said, "Are you kidding?" And Leo knew what he meant. And he said, "Listen, we would love to have you on the Jeffersons, and if you join our team, you will never be treated that way. Color will never be an issue." And the next year, Henry McDonald was on the Jeffersons, and he and Leo became lifelong friends. He played for the Jeffersons on and off for the next 7 years. And they were friends. There were photos of them when they were both in their 70s, together. And it was a long-lasting friendship, and I think that Henry really appreciated that. As a matter of fact, John has a letter from Fritz Pollard to Leo thanking him for all he did for Henry McDonald. So
Wow.
it was a big deal. Yeah.
I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, you talk about the 1900s and 1910s. I mean, Jim Crow, I mean, was it Plessy versus Ferguson? It was 1894. I mean, this is the early years of Jim Crow, and all of that. That was incredibly brave of him in that time. I mean, that's extraordinary when you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. He said, Henry didn't even seem to realize how poorly he was being treated because it was so natural to him. That's the way it always was. So when Leo kind of pointed out, they're not even, helping you or patting you on the back, he was like, yeah, no big deal, kind of thing, and Leo couldn't believe it. Like, if we had a superstar on our team, I don't care what color he is,
Yeah.
So, but their friendship transcended the football. They became good friends off the field. So
that's beautiful. Yeah. Jeff, last question. Any ideas about your next book project? And if you've got an idea, let us know about it. And when can we expect its release?
No, I don't have anything right now. My wife is kind of like, okay, this one took about 3.5 years to complete, and there's some projects around the house. I mean, I'm sure there'll be something. I'm waiting for the Bills to win the Super Bowl. Maybe that'll be it.
Yep.
That'll never happen. But I've got a few ideas I kicked around, but I don't know if I want to write another biography or. But, I had so much fun writing this one because I learned so much about the history of the NFL and the importance of some of these early men, not just Leo. Carl Stork is another one from Dayton. He was very important to the formation of the league. So, maybe there's another figure like that out there to write about. I don't know, but I don't really have any plans.
Does John Steffenhagen have any plans? Anything he's expressed to you?
His life is so wrapped up in the Jeffersons. I don't know if he really wants to write another book about football, unless it's related to Leo Lyons. But he did joke to me that he's considering writing a children's book now. So
okay.
So that was kind of interesting.
Beautiful. Jeffrey, I want to wish you the best of luck, with your future endeavors, and let me know when your next book does come out. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, man. I appreciate it.
You take care. Okay. Bye-bye.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, for next week's show where I'll be interviewing author Laura Macaluso. Thank you and good night.